Okay, I was told by a student that I didn't, we're going to carry on with the calculator. I ran it and I was like, what's wrong? Why am I not seeing it? Well, I forgot some of the most important things. One of the most important things that I always do when I use my tkinter is I need to define my window. Here I'm telling my button to be in a window, but I didn't define what the window is. So I'm going to put in here the following code. Window is equal to capital TK. That's how we call it. And then let me give a title to the window. I'll call it Mr. Poy's Tic Tac Toe. Great. So now I can run the program. So in the last video you saw I couldn't run it, but now you'll see it should run just wonderfully. And here we go. We have buttons. So 9 buttons. I can click button 1, 2, 3, and they're all going to be passed to this function called place mark. Well, that, I guess, is the next thing. So we've started by putting, creating 9 buttons using tkinter. We defined a font, and we defined the window to put it in. So now let's start to make our game. So to make our game, what we need to do is we need to take advantage of some global variables to keep it really simple. So some of the variables that we're going to need are, how many turns we took. And I decided that in this game, player X always goes first. Anytime I've played tic-tac-toe, X goes first. So I need to keep track of player X if it's their turn. Because if it's player X's turn, we're going to place an X. I decided not to make a player O's turn because it's really easy to program. If it's player X's turn, place an X. If it's not player X's turn, place an O. So what I decided to do is I'm going to initialize some global variables. So one of the global variables, and I'll put it right here after at the very top, is player X's turn. And it's going to be a Boolean variable. So as I was saying, either it is player X's turn or it's not player X's turn. So a Boolean is perfect for that. One of the other variables I want to have that we had in our we looked at previously is game over. And game over is good because we're going to keep playing while the game's not over. So in our guessing game, remember we had game over? So it was great for a loop. So we keep playing while not game over. So very easy to work with. So I know I'm going to need a game over. So I'm going to want to make sure I have that. And then one of the last things I'm going to need to know is how many turns have taken place. So I'll create another variable called number of turns, and I'll initialize that variable to a value of 0. So here is my initialization of variables, global variables that I'm going to use. So player X's turn, game over, and number of turns. Okay, so now that we're in here and ready to place a mark, one of the global variables I'm going to need right off the bat, so I'll use the keyword global, is player X's turn. So we're going to need that because I want to know if I should place an X. And so just to demonstrate what we can do is because I've passed a button, so when I click, say, button 3, the third button, it's going to go to this function and we're going to have button 3. So what I want to do is if I press a button, I want to change the text. And so I can go button and I can say the property called text, and I put that in square brackets. So it's going to go in here and it's going to take a look at the button and it's going to say, oh, the text right now was set to equal a space. Well, I'm going to say it's now going to equal the character of an X. So let's run the program and just see what happens. So I go run, and when I click on the third button, an X would appear because it goes to the function called def place mark, and I pass the button 3, and so the text of button 3 is going to equal X. If I click this button, X will appear there, and you can see I can put X's anywhere in my game. Oh, nice and easy. Okay, now what I want to do is I want to place O if it's player O's turn. Okay, so how am I going to do that? Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use an if statement. So I'm going to say if it's player X's turn, if that is true, so it's player X's turn, what I want to do is I want to place this X. And then I'm going to say my turn is over. So player X's turn is over. So I'm going to change the variable, player X's turn, and I'm going to say it's now false because we've had our turn. Okay, let's do an else statement because sometimes it's not going to be player X's turn. Right after I click X for the first time, it becomes X and my turn is over. So I'm going to put the keyword else here, and what I'm going to do is pretty well the same thing here. So that's a great use for copy. And I'm going to say player X, or it's not player X's turn. So I'm going to place an O here. And then the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to swap this to player X's turn is true. So O is played, now player X gets a turn. Okay, so again, what this function does is when we click on a button, we're going to read in if it's player X's turn, global variable, and if it is true, we're going to place an X and we're going to swap turns. And if it wasn't true, if player X already had a turn and it became false, we're then going to play an O. So let me try to run it now and just see what happens. And here it gets an X. The next time I go, it has an O. The next time an X. And then the next time maybe an O. Uh-oh, a bit of a problem. O can definitely start taking over here because you can click on any button you want, and it's going to put the letter. So how am I going to fix that? So if I click on here, you can see it'll swap between X and O. And that's not quite so good. So I don't want that. So one of the ways to get around that is by making the button state locked. So I'll show you how we can do that. So in this function, I'm not going to leave the function, but I'm going to leave the if-then statement because here that swaps turns, which is perfect. But what I'm going to do here is I'm going to lock the button. It's called disabling the button. And to do that, I'm going to, again, take a look at the button that was passed to the placeMark function. So the button that we passed to this function, and I want to check on a property called its state. And so in this case, the state of the button, I can say is disabled. And how did I find out how to disable a button? Well, Google was my friend. I just quickly Googled how to disable Python button in tkinter, and this came up pretty quick. So again, button state is assigned disabled. And so now I'll run it one more time, and you're going to see that this is not, it's going to be locked. So once I click it, I can't click this. I can press with the mouse as many times as I want. It's not going to, it's just going to be locked. So I can't change any of these. Perfect. Okay, so we're making some pretty big progress with this mark function. So what I want to do lastly is I want to call a function inside a function because as you noticed in the last game, I should have won. I didn't win. So something needs to happen if we win. So I'm going to presume here, I'm going to create another function called check for a win. And so what I'm going to do is when I place the mark, I'm not only going to place X's and O's and disable buttons, but I also want to check to see if someone has won the game. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to call a function inside a function. So I'm going to type in here check win. And so check win is going to go down and to this function and check for a win. Okay, so if we're going to check for a win, let's take a look at our tic-tac-toe game. And if I want to run this, I would have to pass for now on this function. But later on, I'll put the code in here. So let me just run this. And when I run it this time, what you're going to see, nothing's going to be different except for the buttons are locked after I click them. And we're going to need to check for some wins. And so to check for wins, there's going to be a win would be possible in rows. So horizontally, we can win if 1, 2, and 3 are the same. Or we can win if 4, 5, and 6 button are the same text. And we could win if 7, 8, and 9 are the same text. So how can I check that? So that's 3 different ways. And then there's going to be 3 vertical ways. So up and down, this could be a win vertically. So 1, 4, and 7, 8, 7. 2, 5, and 8, and 3, 6, and 9. That's a win. And then there's 2 diagonal ways to win. I can win this way, and I can win this way. So in the check win, what I'm going to do, and I'm not going to give you all the code. You're going to have to figure some of this out for yourself. But what you're going to need to do is we want to check the 3 horizontal rows for the same text. And we're going to need to check the 3 vertical columns for the same text. And we're going to need to check the 2 diagonals for the same text. So let me start in here, and then it's going to be up to you. So let's take a look at what I would do. So I would use an if statement, and I'm going to check btn1, and what property of btn1? The text property. So I put that in square brackets, and I want to see if it is equal to the text in btn2. So if there's an X in btn1 or an O in btn1, and it's the same, there's an O or an X also in btn2, then that is going to be a potential win. But there has to be another condition that is also exactly true at the same time. So not only does button 1 and 2 have to be the same, but and. So there's a keyword that we can use called and. And how and works is the first statement has to be true. So button 1 and 2 have to have the same value. And button number 2, the text in there, so if we're going for X's, so suppose 1 and 2 are X's, we want to see if 2 and 3 are also X's. So same thing, I'm going to check the text and see if they are exactly the same. So I've got here button 1 and 2, and I've got button 2 and button 3. And so people might say, great, this is going to be a win. So if that's true, it's a win. And we can code for a win. And so things that we could do, for example, is I could change the background color. So to change the background color, I can reconfig the background and say it's equal to yellow, let's say. So now the background of the button is going to equal yellow, and I do that for 1, 2, and 3. But there's one slight problem when we do this. And the one slight problem, so 1, 2, and 3 are all going to be yellow now. is that if button 1 and 2 and 2 and 3 are the same, what if they're empty? Oh, right. You might recall down here, we put the text being a space just to keep a little placeholder. Aha. So those would all be true because there's a space before you play the game. If you clicked on button 5 for the first move and it checks for a win, it would say, oh, 1, 2, and 3 are all the same. In fact, I'll run it and we should see that happen. Thanks. Has to be lowercase. Again, I keep reverting back to other programming languages. Whoops. So here, if I click on button 6, it's going to place an X. So button 6, it's going to place an X, and it's going to check for a win, and it's going to notice, oh, 1, 2, and 3 are the same, so they're yellow. Game's over. So I don't want that. So what we also need to add here is another AND. And so in this other AND, I also want to check that button 3, for example, I could choose 1, 2, or 3. It doesn't really matter which one, but I could say button 3 as an example. Its text, whoops, how did that get down there? Its text is not equal to a space because I had originally put the text of space in all the buttons. So I also now need to have this third condition in here that not only does 1 equal 2 and 2 is 3, but none of them are going to be a space. So I can say button 3 because if they're all the same, it wouldn't get this. And so number 3 is not a space. Okay, so I need to do this many more times, and I think you can figure out how to do it. Again, an easy way is to copy and paste the code, but there's going to be 3 horizontal ones. So first I had 1, 2, and 3, and then I want to check 4 is equal to 5, and 5 is equal to 6, and 6 is not a blank. And if that's true, I am going to yellow 4, 5, and 6 as an example. But you would do, and then you do 7, 8, and 9, and then you do the vertical ones, and then you do the diagonal ones. So let's just run the game, and we pretty well have a tic-tac-toe game here. So I can put an X here, an O down here, an X up here, an O here, and an X here, and it found the win, and our game is done.